Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, really glad you're with us for the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Summer's supposed to be the slow time in politics. Not necessarily during a presidential election year. You got convention season and all that stuff. But this year, definitely not. Definitely not leaving us with having to scratch our way to three martinis. It's an abundance of potential topics today. But let's start with our good martini today, Jim. And this one comes to us from Yahoo News, but other folks have reported this as well. I think it's good in two different ways. Two deputy U.S. Marshals, thought to be guarding Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor's home in Washington, D.C., shot a suspected carjacker who pulled out a gun last week. The U.S. Marshal's office said that suspect Kentrell Flowers, 18, allegedly walked up to one of the deputies' cars around 1:15 a.m. on July 5th and pointed a gun at the bodyguard. The marshal fired 4 shots, hitting Flowers in the mouth. Flowers was taken to hospital for treatment and arrested. Quote, the deputy U.S. Marshals involved in the shooting incident were part of the unit protecting the residences of U.S. Supreme Court justices. As a general practice, the Marshals don't discuss specifics of protective details. Authorities have not suggested Flowers was intentionally targeting Sotomayor or the security detail. In other words, it was just another random D.C. carjacking attempt, so that should make everybody feel better. In June 2023, 26-year-old California resident Nicholas John Roski was arrested near Brett Kavanaugh's home and charged with attempted murder after he told officials he wanted to kill the conservative Supreme Court justice following the leaked draft majority opinion on Roe v. Wade. The story's wrong. That was actually 2022. But, Jim, obviously it's good that these guys were there. It's good that they stopped this guy from attacking them successfully and stealing their car. There's no evidence that Sotomayor was in any particular danger. So how the incident played out was good. I would also hope that it would help the justice see the value of the Second Amendment and having the ability to personally protect yourself from people who would do you harm. I'm probably spinning into the wind with that hope, but nonetheless, it's hopefully a lesson here.
You know, Greg, I was, as you were describing that, I was thinking about how rarely we see Supreme Court justices do interviews. Once in a great while, they'll do some remarks at a law school or some legal society or some nonprofit or something, and they'll take a few questions, usually from a very friendly interviewer. You get a bit more when they retire. But it would be really nice to ask these questions of Sotomayor. It would be really nice to say, hey, does this experience make you feel any differently about the individual right to bear arms? And do you feel like there was anything unjust, immoral, or unconstitutional about your bodyguard's use of a firearm to defend you and to defend your property? And if so, why didn't you stop your bodyguard from doing that? Why do you have, if you genuinely don't believe the Second Amendment preserves an individual right to bear arms, why do you have armed security? Isn't that a glaring contradiction between your values and your actions? Or do you feel like you deserve it because you're a Supreme Court justice, but the average American does not? And how do you think the average American, these are all really valid questions, an indication that this justice who, the wise Latina, talked about how much, the importance of equality, equal justice under the law, is arguing that some people should be allowed to own guns and some people should not. And it's not based on failure to pass a psychological exam or a criminal record or age or any of these other factors that are legitimate reasons to restrict someone from owning a firearm, but simply because of one of class or political position or political status. It would be great to ask these questions. We're never going to get her to answer these questions. She's never going to sit down and do an interview. And it's never been a tradition for Supreme Court justices to do that interview. But if you kind of wonder if I'm not saying justices should be elected. I'm not saying, I'm skeptical of this argument about term limits. But Supreme Court justices really aren't held accountable the way other elected officials are. And we're currently complaining about a president who doesn't do interviews anymore, doesn't do press conferences anymore. Supreme Court justices have never done this, and all of their thinking has been reflected in the opinions that they issue. And I think maybe that's insufficient. Maybe that's not enough. I don't know how we even begin to do this, but I do think when a Supreme Court justice, there was a Washington Post columnist back in the 80s or 90s who was vehemently pro-gun control, but then shot an intruder. I can't remember the name of which one it was. But just like the idea of that's the same sense of people who don't support school choice but send their kids to private schools. At some point, the glaring contradiction between the values you state you have and the values you actually practice through your actions becomes so glaring that you deserve to be called out on that. It'd be really nice to talk to Sonia Sotomayor about this.
Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't say where the house is, and it shouldn't in the story, obviously. But I'm guessing that Sonia Sotomayor doesn't live in the worst part of town. So I'm guessing it's a relatively, by DC standards, nice part of town. So it tells you that crime is potentially going to happen anywhere in the nation's capital. It's one of the reasons people are a little bit leery about spending a lot of time there. And secondly, Jim, obviously nothing should happen to the U.S. Marshal here. But if you were in Washington, D.C., and somebody tried to carjack you and you pulled a weapon, the attempted carjacker might face charges. But there's a pretty good chance in D.C. that you would also face charges because of their hatred of the Second Amendment. And so
there
that's
are a
another
whole
issue
bunch
as well.
of progressive, often Soros-supported prosecutors who genuinely see armed citizens defending themselves as a more serious threat to public safety than the criminals themselves that prompt the citizens to use the firearms to defend themselves. Now, here's the thing. If you crack down on carjackers, breaking and entering, everything from purse snatching, if you actually crack down on that, maybe you'd have fewer armed citizens, people feeling the need to walk around with handguns to protect themselves. What if you did job one, guys? Let's try that. Let's just see what happens.
Good job by the U.S. Marshals. And they didn't have to have a hard target search for him because they got him right there. And they actually got the right one. They were looking for the right one the whole time. It's amazing.
It was not a eminent doctor. Go figure.
That's right. All right, well, let's talk about Field of Greens. Field of Greens is a fantastic addition to your hopefully healthy diet and also the supplements that you eat. But look, what you eat is not going to give you everything you need. And even a lot of the times the supplements are not. And that's where Field of Greens comes in. Everything they use are grown here. They're not grown in China or Latin America. They got spinach, barley, green tea, ginger, and turmeric, all proven to have great, great health benefits. And so if you're needing that extra boost to get all the nutrients you need, Field of Greens.
Each fruit and vegetable that is in Field of Greens was doctor selected for studied health benefits. It's what your body needs. There's a heart health group, lungs, kidneys, and metabolism groups for healthy weight. Field of Greens is nutrition the way nature intended.
So don't look back and say, I should have paid attention to nutrition when I was younger. Field of Greens is a key to better health today and when it matters most. To start, Field of Greens will give you 15% off your first order plus free rush shipping. Visit fieldofgreens.com and use the promo code 3ML. That's promo code 3ML to get 15% off and free shipping at fieldofgreens.com. Fieldofgreens.com. All right, Jim, back to As the World Turns, the soap opera within the Democratic Party about whether Joe Biden should stay or go. Lately, it's been a little more likely that he's going to stay. But yesterday, a few different things happened that have Democrats more on edge than usual. First of all, a bunch of projections from the Cook Political Report, I think it was 6 different states, moved more in the Republican direction. It's not saying that Trump is favored to win in all of them, but some of them moved from likely Democrat to lean Democrat or lean Democrat to toss-up, and some of them did move from toss-up to lean Republican and lean Republican to likely Republican. And so Democrats don't like this very much. And yesterday up on the Democratic side of the Senate on Capitol Hill, they had a luncheon, and you had John Tester and Sherrod Brown, who are both in tough re-election fights. Tester from Montana, Brown from Ohio, saying they don't think Biden can win and they're worried about his potential drag on the ticket. Michael Bennet of Colorado, who's not up, but says he's also convinced Donald Trump is likely to win and possibly in a landslide. Here's how he said it to CNN last night.
This race is on a trajectory that is very worrisome if you care about the future of this country. Joe Biden was 9 points up at this time. The last time he was running, Hillary Clinton was 5 points up. This is the first time in more than 20 years that a Republican president has been up in this part of the campaign. Donald Trump is on track, I think, to win this election and maybe win it by a landslide and take with him the Senate and the House. And so for me, this isn't a question about polling. It's not a question about politics. It's a moral question about the future of our country. And I think it's critically important for us to come to grips with what we face if together we put this country on the path of electing Donald Trump again.
So just to be clear, what Michael Bennet is saying here, in my opinion, Jim, is that he's not all that worried about his cognitive state. He's worried that he's losing. So if Biden was a vegetable and up by 5 points, it seems like he wouldn't necessarily have this same thing. He's worried about Democrats losing control. I think the Senate is going to be pretty stable. West Virginia is going to go Republican, possibly Montana. Democrats, of course, are holding out hope in Texas. I'm not sure where else they think they might win. But other than that, I think status quo is likely to hold. If Trump wins, I think the House would probably stay in Republican hands. But what do you make of the Democrats' secret meetings spilling out yesterday into public projections?
The reason this is our bad martini is because Biden being in this state is bad for the country, bad for the world, very dangerous for the world, I would argue. And when you say, well, Bennet is only saying this because he's losing. Yes, but Greg, why is he losing? Because people think he's a vegetable, right? Like these are intertwined in a way that is inseparable. Your chocolate's in my peanut butter's in your chocolate, kind of, inseparability there. Literally, as we are taping this, the New York Times has just published an op-ed from noted political analyst George Clooney. And before, it's very easy to scoff, George Clooney, but like he's coming out and saying the Joe Biden I was with 3 weeks ago at the fundraiser was not the Joe big effing deal Biden of 2010. He wasn't even the Joe Biden of 2020. He was the same man we all witnessed at the debate. Was he tired? Yes. A cold? Maybe. But our party leaders need to stop telling us that 51 million people didn't see what we just saw. The Stephanopoulos interview only reinforced what we saw the week before. Now, again, you may remember at this Hollywood fundraiser, Biden seemed to need help getting off the stage by Barack Obama. And he looked very gingerly and kind of out of it and all that stuff. And people who noticed this, like, no, you're crazy. This is deep fakes. This is, all that kind of stuff. Now Clooney's coming out. Oh, the other thing which people pointed out was that there was a picture taken with George Clooney, Julia Roberts, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden. And first of all, worst sequel to Ocean's 11 ever. Secondly, Julia Roberts has her arm around Biden in a way that, like somebody said, it's the way you'd help your grandfather if he was like used to using a walker and didn't want to use the walker in the picture. It just looked very ginger. She looked very protective of, almost like she was helping make sure he could stand up. When I heard Clooney coming out and saying, look, there is no better Biden. The Biden I saw behind closed scenes is the same Biden you saw on the debate. And so people say, oh, this is great. This is more likely that Trump's going to win. That may well be the case. Listeners know I'm not a huge fan of Trump, but I think what's really terrifying is that this guy is president right now, and he will remain the president for the next 6 months unless somebody invokes the 25th Amendment. And this is just a disastrous state for the country and the world. I'm trying to think about what, we're having the NATO summit this week. What is every other country thinking, looking at the United States, where everybody, even Bennet, even Clooney, can see Biden is senile. Biden is not able to communicate. Biden is not, is seriously seems to be deteriorating right before our eyes. Everybody can see it except the Biden family. And everybody can see Joe Biden should not be commander-in-chief except the Biden family. And yet somehow we can't get this to change. This is a really bad state for, this is, we're well beyond Chris Buckley novel territory. We're well beyond broad political satire. We're really in something that's something, it's a Stephen King novel or something. We're now getting more and more, I'm not recommending anybody go dead zone on us, but just kind of observe that, we have a president there who can't who's mentally deteriorating before our eyes, and everybody seems to see it, but nobody can do anything about it. So, Biden cabinet, that's your cue.
It takes the vice president plus a majority of the cabinet to move forward if the president himself isn't going to acknowledge that. And it's pretty clear that Kamala Harris, like most Democrats, is kind of playing the slow card here. They want Biden to step aside, but they don't want to shove him because they think that's going to look bad somehow. Even Nancy Pelosi had comments, I think it was this morning, to the extent of, oh, well, that's a decision for him to make. We hope he makes it quickly, and I'll support whatever decision he makes. So trying to drop a few clues there. But in the end, if Jill's got his ear, which she does, and Hunter, little subtle hints like that, I don't think is going to be the trick. Maybe they're waiting out the Republican convention and see what happens then, and then they can focus on the Democratic convention. But the longer this goes, the easier it is to stay. I think it was you, Jim, that said they're following the Ralph Northam strategy. If you just decide not to leave, Then eventually people stop talking about it, but this is a different story than that. Well, if you're a prominent Democrat, chances are you've had a few adult beverages as you try to figure out what to do about Joe Biden. But if you're going to do that, take Z-Biotics first, and your next morning will go much better. Won't change the fact that Biden hasn't done what you want him to do yet, but Z-Biotics is the probiotic that helps you bounce back the next day.
Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in your gut. And it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next morning. Z-Biotics produces an enzyme that breaks this byproduct down. So just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, as always, and you will feel your best the next morning.
Yeah, I've got a friend who swears by Z-Biotics, says definitely made him feel better the next morning. So go to zbiotics.com/3ml to get 15% off your first order when you use 3ml at checkout. Z-Biotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Visit zbiotics.com/3ml and use the code 3ml at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, Z-Biotics, for sponsoring this episode and our good times. All right, Jim, crazy martini time. But before we get there, just a quick follow-up on the last martini. How much do you think this press conference is going to matter to Biden's political survival on Thursday? If it's a complete train wreck, I think it definitely adds momentum. If it's kind of like the Stephanopoulos interview, maybe doesn't change much. And if he just somehow puts it together, it'll possibly tamp down demands to get him to go. But overall, how big of a deal do you think it's going to be?
So there's a huge space between so good that it reassures everyone, which I think is actually kind of impossible. I don't think there's a drug in the world that can take 15 years off Biden's age and make him mentally sharp and all that stuff. I don't think giving him the questions guarantees he's going to have great answers. And he can probably assume what a bunch of those questions are going to be. There's going to be a question about Ukraine. There's going to be a question about the future of NATO. There's going to be a question about Trump. Those are the kind of questions the president gets asked are really rarely, obscure, blindsiding style issues. And the bar is very low. So the idea that for Biden to be so bad that everybody unifies and says he can't be president anymore, we'll do it. We'll pull the trigger. We'll convince the delegates to not, who have been pledged to him, not to support him. That's a really low bar to be here. So my guess is it's going to be somewhere in between. There's a huge space between those two extremes. It'll be bad. It won't be great. It won't be enough, but it won't be quite so. I don't think it'll be quite so bad that even the congressional Democrats who have come out and said he's our nominee and we're sticking with him suddenly change their mind and say he can't. I think you probably get something akin to the Stephanopoulos interview, which I think was generally bad, but not quite so bad that it no longer surprised people. Like people are getting used to doddering, unable to speak, stumbling, bumbling, mumbling Joe Biden. What the question is going to be, first of all, notice that the president has done one televised interview since the debate, and he's going to do one press conference. And we'll see how many questions he takes. He only did 22 minutes with Stephanopoulos. I think the reason Biden doesn't do any of these things anymore is because he can't. And the question is, do the Democrats really want to go into November with a guy who can't communicate? That's why I feel like we're just in such utterly, bizarrely uncharted waters right now.
Just amazing to watch these people pretend they didn't know about it until half a month ago. All over the place. Just crazy. Okay, our official Crazy Martini also deals with the Biden administration. And we had this as the Crazy Martini the day after he made this idea public in the State of the Union address. As he was slamming Israel, he was talking about how the U.S. was going to build this pier in Gaza to bring in relief supplies, but no boots on the ground. Boots on the pier, which touch the ground, but no boots on the ground. But now this pier has been a complete debacle. Turns out sometimes there's rough weather in the Mediterranean Sea that basically ripped this thing apart. And so ABC News, among others, now reporting, quote, the U.S. military's temporary pier will be reattached to a beach in Gaza on Wednesday and will likely be removed permanently a few days later. The $230 million, I thought it was $320 actually, system known as Joint Logistics Over the Shore, or JLOTS, had been authorized to remain operational in Gaza through July 31st. And despite U.S. officials openly discussing it remaining operational beyond that date, it now appears it will cease operation before even reaching the end of the month. And given how many days it's been out of service, I think that $320 million is going to add up to about 3 weeks of being an operation. Even then, the stuff didn't get to the people it was supposed to because of bandits and terrorist organizations intercepting the aid. And so it's been a total debacle. But I guess given the distractions that are going on domestically, Jim, this probably won't get as much attention as it should. But this was a terrible idea in the beginning. And I guess the only good news is that no Americans got killed being that close to the terrorists.
About the best defense you can make of this Gaza Pier project is a lot of us, from the beginning of the announcement said, oh my God, that's a giant target for Hamas. That's a giant target for Palestinian Islamic Jihad. They're just going to start bombing it. There was some firing upon the site early on. But by and large, at least as far as we've heard, there hasn't been a ton of Palestinian terrorist organizations targeting it. And you can say the pier, when the weather's good, works. It has managed to unload a great deal of aid, and it gets put on trucks. And then the trucks get ransacked. Angry, mobs surround them, and they steal the food off there, and it doesn't get to the people it necessarily. Some of those people stealing it off the truck presumably need some, but it's not getting to the warehouses and the official aid organizations the way it's supposed to. Not exactly a sterling success. And as I alluded to earlier, the type of pier that it is, remember, this is like just a whole bunch of floating platforms. And you basically, the idea is that you need a relatively stable sea level. Ideally, these things are in some sort of natural harbor or jetty or just something that's going to, block it from the natural waves and high tide and low tide and all the different things that will happen when the seas are stormy or choppy. It could handle up to about 3 feet. Well, apparently beyond 3 feet is really not a rare thing on that part of Gaza. You have the whole Mediterranean just coming up against the shade. But my guess is that everybody involved in this who did it professionally could see this coming and saying, like, look, this is really on the edge of the kind of environment it can operate in. Any bad day, any stiff wind, any strong currents, we're going to have problems. And it certainly seems like they were told, be quiet, do your job. We'll worry about that later. Well, later has arrived, and the pier have to be shut down, and they had pieces floating away and all that stuff. So you could say this is the good martini. They've pulled the plug. They've recognized that the weather is not going to change, that the level of the waves in the Gaza Strip is not going to change. The weather's not going to cooperate. If this was a political exercise, which it certainly seemed like it was from the word go, is there any sign that Americans feel better about, or that left-wingers who think Biden's ignoring the Palestinians, have they changed their minds? No, they still call him Genocide Joe. Nothing changed. This was a futile exercise from the beginning, both in terms of the logistical task and both in terms of the political task of getting angry lefty college students to stop, chanting that Joe Biden is helping Israel commit genocide. It was always nonsense. You can't reason somebody or make a big PR display to change somebody's mind and something like that.
Jim, we'll see how this wraps up. Hopefully no Americans are harmed in the final days of this whole operation. But my favorite part of all this, given the complete debacle that it's been, is the UN official who called the raiding of the trucks independent redistribution.
Freelance, individual initiative.
Oh, man, what a mess. Anyway, Jim, have a good day. I'm sure there'll be plenty more insanity tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Do be sure to subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch if you don't already, and tell your friends to do it as well. We'd love to have them listening. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a terrific Wednesday and join us again on Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.